Let us, in this session, look at the analysis to understand the poem Go and Catch a Falling Star. First, the vocabulary used in the poem. Mandrake, a kind of tuber that often resembles a human legendary for its magical properties. Cleft, something that is divided into. Mermaids, mythical creatures that are half women and half fish. In folklore, mermaids are often said to lure sailors to their deaths with seductive songs. Envy, the painful desire for something that belongs to someone else. For something. Jealousy, often used interchangeably with envy, means the desire to keep something that belongs to you or to yourself. This is the subtle difference. Advance, to further, support, or help. Thou, an informal word used for you. Best, beest, meaning be, the speaker is saying if you are born to strange sights. Thee, the object form of thou, also an informal or familiar way of saying you. Wilt, will, befell, happened to. True and fair, in this context, true and fair means romantically faithful and beautiful. Findest means finds. False, sexually unfaithful. Ere, before. Now, we'll take a look at the themes of Go and Catch a Falling Star. Theme of women's infidelity. The poem explores a traditional and misogynistic literary theme of Donne's era, women's romantic infidelity, using vivid images of magic and mystery. The speaker insists that a faithful woman is so hard to find, she might as well be the stuff of legends. The speaker begins by commanding his listener to perform a series of impossible tasks, with the implication being that female honesty or faithfulness is the same in the realm of impossibility. Some of the speaker's tasks sound like they are right out of a fairy tale. Impregnating a mandrake root, which is a tuber whose roots vaguely resemble a human and are often granted magical qualities in folklore. Listening to mermaids and investigating the devil's cloven foot. These images all have transgressive and or sexual connotations. Mermaids were meant to lure sailors to their deaths. Impregnating a root would take black magic. And the devil's foot, well, it belongs to the deceitful devil. The other tasks the speaker commands are more abstract and wistful. Seeking past years suggests a longing for lost time, while preventing envy stinging makes the reader suspect that the speaker might have had some painful romantic disappointments lurking in those vanished years. The final lines asking the listener to find what wind serves to advance an honest mind punches the point home. Rewards for the faithful are as hard to find as any legendary creature. Expanding on this idea, the speaker says that even if his listener spent an entire lifetime searching for a faithful woman, he would not find her. He imagines the listener on a visionary quest, creating a sense that the impossibilities of the first stanza might just be found somewhere. The speaker also imagines his listener has the power to see strange sights, a magical gift that might allow him to discover the impossibilities of the first stanza. But even if such a seer were to spend his whole life looking, he would never find a woman true and fair. Here, the magical things of the first stanza are presented as just within the realm of possibility. A gifted person might be able to find them. However, he would still never be able to find a faithful woman. This makes women's fidelity even more legendary than a mermaid. The speaker concludes by imagining that even if the listener did find a faithful woman, that woman's faithfulness would never last. The speaker would not bother going to see this hypothetical woman even if she were next door, because while she might have been faithful when the friend met her, she'd be unfaithful before the speaker could reach her. The final stanza thus moves from the magical uncertainty of the earlier part of the poem, when, after all, there is some chance that one might see the invisible, to an earthly cynicism. Cynicism means disbelief in anything good happening. The wistful romance of pilgrimages, falling stars, and magical quests is broken by the speaker's grim belief. No one will ever find a woman true and fair. Go and catch a falling star, symbols. Symbol of the falling star. The poem's famous first line prepares the reader for a lot of the ideas to come. To catch a falling star is of course impossible, but the effort to do so suggests the speaker's crushed dreams. The stars have long been symbols of divinity, purity, hope, wishes, faithfulness, and inspiration. Check out Dante's Divine Comedy, in which every book ends with the word stars, for a powerful example of this ancient symbolism. Once one can fix wishes to a star or navigate by it. If the star here is falling, the speaker's wishes and hopes for a true and faithful lover are falling too, and there is absolutely no chance that he is going to be able to rescue them. In Donne's English, falling also has sexual connotations, suggesting that this imagined star has lost its purity. Symbol of the mandrake root. This vivid and startling image, which might at first strike the reader as purely weird, plays right into the poem's larger argument about women's infidelity. Mandrake roots, which often grow in humanoid shapes, have a long folkloric history. They were believed to climb out of the ground and walk around at night, or to have magical powers. And in fact, they do have hallucinatory properties when eaten. To impregnate a mandrake root, then, would be to do something seriously illicit, dangerous, and tricky. The idea of a hybrid human root baby relates to the speaker's concerns about fidelity. Two things that shouldn't have mixed in order to make this strange creature. And the mandrake's associations with visions and hallucinations speaks to the poem's themes of infidelity and untrustworthiness. The mandrake then works with the poem's other symbols in this stanza to reiterate the speaker's fear of deceit and his mistrust of women. The speaker lumps women in with these images of depravity, lust, and outright evil. Symbol of the devil's foot. The devil, and more particularly his foot, introduces an element of religious unease to the poem. The devil is the arch deceiver, of course, a figure of sinister trickery and dishonesty, and thus fits right in with the poem's theme of unfaithfulness. Here, one might say that being faithless romantically is linked with being spiritually faithless. The devil's cleft foot similarly suggests a split, meaning a divide, for instance, between what someone says and what they do. The devil was often depicted with goat legs. Goats were a common symbol of sexual insatiability and lust. To walk through the world on a devil's cleft foot, then, would be to move in a way both lustful and dishonest. In the poem, the devil's cleft foot works alongside with other symbols of lust, deceit, and disappointment. The star mandrake root, and mermaids to hammer home the speaker's distrust of women and vision of women as faithless, immoral creatures. Symbols of mermaids. Mermaids are a traditional symbol of the attractions and dangers of sex. Thought to lure sailors to their deaths with enchanting songs, mermaids are part of the same family tree as the sirens who played similar tricks in classical literature. A mermaid, like the devil's foot, is also split. Mermaids are dishonest not only in that their sexy singing only spells sailors' dooms, but in that their top and bottom halves don't match up. That beautiful lady is fish from the waist down. The sailor who follows the song of a mermaid is thus doubly deceived. Together with the image of the falling star, mandrake root, and devil's cleft foot, it's clear the speaker has some serious trust issues when it comes to relationships. Each of these symbols can be thought of as relating to duplicity and deception. The fact that the speaker lumps an honest woman in with them then tells readers everything they need to know about the speaker's mindset when it comes to ladies. Go and Catch a Falling Star, Poetic Devices and Figurative Language. First, alliteration. Donne does not use a lot of alliteration in this poem, but the way in which he does use it plays an important tonal role. While the themes and opinions of Go and Catch a Falling Star are sour at best, the poem itself does not feel sour. Rather, it's lively, energetic, witty. Some of that is down to the poem's driving, rollicking rhythm. See the entry on meter, etc. But alliteration also plays a part in keeping the poem sparky and pleasant on the level of sound. Much of the alliteration here appears in two-word sequences, which fits right in with the poem's use of striking two-word iambic lines. Remember that an iamb is just a poetic foot with a dardum beat pattern, meaning one unstressed followed by a stressed syllable. In any case, what wind in line 8, the alliteration and the iambs happen at the same time. This is a strong effect, not at all subtle, and it contributes to the poem's highly stylized flair. Strong alliteration does not happen all that often in a day-to-day speech, and thus catches the reader's attention. It sounds pleasing, but it also sounds artful rather than natural. And artfulness, the sometimes deceptive reshaping of reality, is one of the main things the poem is about. Donne's speaker, through his mannered alliteration, draws our attention to the artifice of poetry as well as the artifice of love. Allusion. Allusion to shared folkloric and religious knowledge helps the speaker to create his magical mystical atmosphere. The mandrake root in line 2 is a reference to the mandrake plant, a tuber with roots that are often thought to resemble a human being or a fetus, and which often play a role in folklore. To impregnate such a plant is a disturbing image, one that suggests an association with dark magic or something unnatural. The speaker's reference to mermaids brings up a lot of thematic associations, some of which are discussed further in the symbols section. While a modern reader might be more likely to associate mermaids with shell bras and musical crabs, to a contemporary of John Donne's, mermaids would have much more sinister connotations. Mermaids were said to lure sailors to their deaths with their beauty and their haunting songs. When the speaker includes mermaids in his catalogue of magical impossibilities in the very first stanza, he is already creating an atmosphere of sexual betrayal. Similarly, the devil would have been a much realer figure to Donne's audience than to many modern day readers. But the devil, as Donne portrays him here, is also a rather folkloric devil, not a terrible fallen angel, but a tricky guy with goat's feet. Allusion to the devil here raises real issues of sin and deceit, but not in a way that darkens the poem too much. Placing the devil among mandrake roots and mermaids, in fact, helps to create the speaker's mood. This isn't a poem of heartbroken despair, but of witty, resigned cynicism. Hyperbole. The poem is filled with hyperbole. The speaker is deliberately dramatic throughout, making the claim that finding an honest woman is harder than spotting a mermaid. That is, that it's impossible. The images here are purposefully outrageous in order to underline the speaker's point. Were the speaker to compare finding a faithful woman to, say, spotting a penny on the ground, the idea would lose its oomph, in other words, its attraction, becoming a rare and lucky but certainly within the realm of possibility. Instead, the speaker insists hyperbolically that his listener could spend 10,000 days and nights riding until his hair turned white and still not find an honest woman anywhere in the entire world. And even if he did, and even if she were right next door, by the time the speaker walked over to her front door, she would have cheated at least two, if not three times. The hyperbole is a way for the speaker to add emphasis to his points, to portray his own certainty in his image, while also adding a touch of humor to the poem. Indeed, the hyperbole also makes the poem feel less serious and perhaps more satirical, since the comparisons are so patently ridiculous. The hyperbole also betrays the speaker's own cynicism and bitterness. He clearly seems to be someone who has been so badly burned in love that he cannot fathom the existence of a single woman true and fair. Irony. The poem gets much of its rhetorical punch from the sharp juxtaposition. Juxtaposition occurs when an author places two things side by side as a way of highlighting their differences. Ideas, images, characters, and actions are all things that can be juxtaposed with one another. For example, it is a common plot device in fairy tales such as Cinderella to juxtapose the good natured main character with a cruel step sibling. The differences between the characters as well as their close relationship to one another serves to highlight the main character's good qualities. Of mythical legendary images against something the speaker insists is even more impossible and rare, that is, an honest woman. The contrast between something ordinary and mundane against things like mermaids and mandrakes is meant to be ironic and hyperbolic. Irony is a literary device or event in which how things seem to be is in fact very different from how they actually are. If this seems like a loose definition, don't worry, it is. Irony is a broad term that encompasses three different types of ironies, each with their own specific definition: verbal irony, dramatic irony, and situational irony. Most of the time, when people use the word irony, they are actually referring to one of these specific types of irony. Hyperbole, on the other hand, is a figure of speech in which a writer or speaker exaggerates for the sake of emphasis. Hyperbolic statements are usually quite obvious exaggerations intended to emphasize a point rather than be taken literally. For example, if in the hyperbolic statement, my backpack weighs a ton, etc., the speaker does not actually think the backpack weighs a ton, nor does he or she intend the listener to think so. The backpack, through the use of the backpack wearer, simply wants to communicate through the use of hyperbole that he or she is carrying a very heavy load. Among all the world's wonders and impossibilities, the speaker maintains the most magical, wondrous, and impossible thing of all is a regular woman who happens to be faithful. Later, the speaker imagines that if such a woman were found, she would be worthy of a pilgrimage, a devotional religious journey. But then he takes it back. He wouldn't even bother to go next door on a quest to meet this woman. The juxtaposition of this saintly pilgrimage with normal old girl next door jadedness lays yet more fuel on the ironic fire. One makes pilgrimages to holy sites not next door to visit a potential girlfriend. The contrast here underscores once again how impossible it is to come across an honest woman, implicitly elevating such a woman to something sacred. What is more, the idea that this woman would have already cheated 2 or 3 times before the speaker could arrive makes the whole idea of a pilgrimage even more ironic, given to that the destination next door is now implied to be a decidedly unholy place. There is also an irony in the third stanza's whole premise. The imaginary true woman, discovered after long and legendary labor by the listener, will herself turn out to be just as false as any other. The speaker's attitude towards the problem of women's fidelity is ironic in a broader tonal sense as well. Jaded, knowing, and disillusioned, this speaker is one whose hopeful expectations have been dashed by unpleasant experience. Form, meter, and rhyme scheme of song Go and Catch a Falling Star. First, the form. Donne invents his own form here. Go and Catch a Falling Star was first printed under the title Song, and there is certainly a musical quality to the poem's shape, a melodic rhythm that even sometimes overrides a more natural sounding pronunciation. And like a song, this poem introduces a theme and then embellishes it. This poem uses 3 9-line stanzas, each with the same rhyme scheme and meter. Three-part structures allows the speaker to make a forceful argument, almost a formal argument like one might make in an essay. In his first stanza, he establishes his major point. Fidelity is about as real as a mermaid. In the second, he provides and swiftly addresses a counterpoint. Even if you could find a mermaid, you couldn't find a faithful woman. And in the third stanza, it is point counterpoint again. If you did find a faithful woman, she would not stay faithful. Thus, each stanza of the poem hands on and ramps up the speaker's argument, bringing him to an uncompromising and damning judgment on women's fidelity. Meter. The predominant meter in the poem is a forceful percussive trochaic tetrameter. This means most lines are added up of 4 feet, each with stressed and unstressed beat pattern. The pattern has plenty of variation throughout, however. Take lines 1 and 2. Go and catch a falling star. Get with child a mandrake root. These lines are missing their final expected, unstressed syllables, ending them on a forceful note. The seventh and eighth lines of each stanza are then different entirely, each consisting of a single iamb, making them something called iambic monometer. Take line 7 and 8 and find what wind. The sudden emphatic switch in these lines demands attention, drawing out the speaker's cynicism. Monometer is rare and can also seem a little hokey and funny, which keeps the poem relatively light-hearted as the speaker builds up his punchline. Rhyme scheme. There is a consistent, predictable rhyme scheme in Go and Catch a Falling Star. This keeps the poem moving forward steadily with a gentle sing-song pattern that lightens the tone. Each star runs A, B, A, B, C, C, D, D, D. The D rhymes are specially notable for stepping a little outside the poetic conventions of Donne's time. Couplets were common, triplets much less so. The rhymes are full and clear-cut throughout, without any half or slant rhymes to complicate things and distract from the speaker's argument. Readers might get caught up in the first stanza, however, where wind is made to rhyme with find and mind. Wind here means the movement of air kind of wind, but it would likely have been pronounced with a long I as in wind things up in Donne's days. The poem's speaker. The speaker of Go and Catch a Falling Star is a man who's suffered some embittering romantic experiences. Though the poem is one massive generalization, there is no honest woman in the whole world, he seems to say, and one that follows a standard trope of the time period when it was written. There are hints that the speaker may have gone through some more personal and specific pain. When, in the first stanza, he wonders where all past years are and how, to keep off envy stinging, the reader gets a sense that the speaker may be mourning time lost to painful longings and disappointment. This speaker is disillusioned, certainly, but he also has a vivid imagination. And while he is uncompromising about the apparently inevitably infidelity of women, he is willing to believe that a person with special gifts might be able to see an invisible world. In this voice, cynicism and magic interweave. The setting of the poem. Two worlds exist side by side in this poem. The world of magic, where a gifted explorer might indeed hear mermaids singing, and the down-to-earth world of next door, where things are very far from magical. The first stanza's world is populated with strange creatures, humanoid mandrake roots, singing mermaids, and the devil himself. It ranges from the sky to deep underground to hell, taking in the ocean on its way. There is a sense of great scope and scale in this world. A person would have to ride 10,000 days and nights to see it all. While the first stanza presents the magic world as a place of impossibilities, the second plays a complicated trick with that idea. The speaker imagines that his listener might actually be able to make the fairy tale discoveries of the first stanza. But this only underlines his bigger point. Even an enchanted world can't produce a faithful woman. This brings readers back to the real world, where the speaker sits in a normal house, on a normal street, and would not venture even so far as down the block to meet a supposedly virtuous woman. The literary and historical context. Literary context. John Donne, born in 1572, died 1631, is perhaps foremost among the metaphysical poets. These were a loose group of British poets, including Andrew Marvell, Thomas Strahan, and George Herbert, among others, who wrote heady, complex, and richly symbolic poems, often on religious and spiritual themes. The metaphysical poets are specially well known for their elaborate conceits, and their poems often explode a single metaphor in intricate detail. Donne is known in particular for his love poetry and his religious poetry, and these two genres often interweave in his work. His famous sequence of holy sonnets, for instance, is as passionate and sexual as any love poetry. Though in his lifetime Donne was better known as a clergyman, he worked for some time as Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. His poetry became deeply beloved and influential after his death. His work underwent a renaissance in the 20th century when modernist poets like Eliot and Yeats rediscovered him. His influence can be seen in the vivid spiritual and philosophical dimensions of their work. The historical context. John Donne lived in a divided and uncertain England, one marked by the death of the feared and beloved Elizabeth I and the less popular kingship of James I. He lived to see the coronation of Charles I, whose reign would end bloodily and headlessly after an unprecedented popular uprising against the monarchy. This was a political and religious landscape in which much that had seemed certain was now unsure. At this time, Catholicism was illegal in England, and John Donne was born to a Catholic family. He struggled a great deal with this troubled religious inheritance and led a wild and dissolute early life. But he was passionately pious and eventually renounced Catholicism, means gave it up, in order to become a Protestant clergyman. King James himself counselled this move, and Donne served the king directly for much of his life, becoming well known for his beautiful sermons. His poetry was less widely known during his lifetime and was only widely read after his death. In 1621, he rose to the prominent position of Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, London's central and most important church, where he served for some years. With this, we end the details about the poem Go and Catch a Falling Star by John Donne. Thank you.